of not working. And the simple way to view it is every dollar that you save is a piece of your future that you own, that you control, that is yours. The flip side of that is like every dollar of debt that you have is a piece of your future that somebody else controls. It's a moment in time in the future that is not yours. It belongs to somebody else. And so I've always viewed it on a spectrum. When I was younger and much poorer, I was a big saver, even though was I independent? Like, no, of course I had to work. I had to work to pay my rent and pay my groceries, of course. But I viewed it as like every $20 that I saved, every $50 that I saved put me in a better position than I was before. And looking back on it, I don't think I could have articulated that 20 years ago, but it's what I felt. A lot of that for me back then was coming from a place of fear. I didn't have a lot of self-confidence in myself and my career. So I was like, I need to save to prepare for when this all comes crashing down. And even though it didn't come crashing down, I'm so glad that I did it because I've had a sense of financial security and I've had a sense of independence financially since I was in my early 20s. Not because I had saved a ton, I hadn't, but any amount that I saved, I viewed as like the cushion that gave me a much higher sense of confidence that if or when things go wrong, I'm not going to be flailing. I'm going to have some cushion to fall back on.
And what is this spectrum? What are the stages of this spectrum?
So let's start at the very bottom. You're homeless, you're panhandling, reliant on the kindness of strangers. As you go up from there, you can be completely reliant on your boss in a job that you don't like. Now that's another low level. As you go up from there, you have, look, I'm reliant on my job, I'm reliant on my paycheck, but I probably have some opportunities. I could go work at another job. I could choose to work here, I could choose to work there. And as you go up from there, it's like, yo, I like my job and I have some savings. So if I lost this job, I can fall back onto it from there. You can go up from there to have, you can live where you want. You can work where you want. You can change fields. You can go and you can do a completely different job. You can take 2 months off and travel if you wanted to. Like you're working your way up all the way to the highest level of financial independence, which is I don't need to work anymore. I've saved enough and I can wake up every morning and do whatever I would like to do. That's obviously an aspiration that for most people will never be reached until they're maybe in their 70s and they're retiring and they have Social Security and some other savings from there. But for most people, like a good level of independence as a good goal is enough savings so that if you lost your job, if your car broke down, if you needed to replace the roof on your house, you would be able to do it without losing that much sleep. That is a realistic level that I think almost anyone can achieve.
Based on everything you know about money, if I want to get to that highest level of complete financial freedom, what's like the 5 things that I should be thinking about at just a sort of a very simple level? Because so many people listening right now think, my goal in life isn't to become a billionaire or tens of millionaire. My goal in life is just to get to that point of freedom as soon as I can, where I can start calling the shots. And there was someone who I was speaking to the other day and said that there's this internet movement of kids who are trying to get, what do they call it? It's like they're trying to get to the point where they can retire early. Fire something.
Financial independence, retire early.
Okay, that.
Yep.
Like how do I get there?
The first thing that I think that's most important, this is the first and the last thing, this is the most important part, is that all wealth, your feeling of wealth, is what you have minus what you want. And it's so easy to ignore the latter. I talk about in the book my late grandmother-in-law, my wife's grandmother, she passed away a couple years ago. For 30 years, she lived off of nothing but $1,700 or $1,800 a month in Social Security. Not a lot of money. By most accounts, very little money. But she didn't want anything more. If she made $1,700 a month, she did not want $1,700 in $1. She was perfectly happy. She found all of her happiness working in her garden, going for walks, watching the birds, watching the sunrise, watching the sunset, talking to her friends, hanging out with her family. But if you asked her, you said, you only make $1,700 a month. You're broke. Doesn't that make you unhappy? She'd be like, what? Like, do you think having more money makes the sunset more beautiful? Do you think having more money makes going for a walk more pleasant? And I'm not saying you should live like you should be content with that amount of money. But the point is, like, she was content. She was totally content, and it was her choice. And I think she was happier financially than some billionaires. Because there's a lot of billionaires who have $1 billion, but they want 2. They have 2 billion, but they want 4. One of the things is that happiness might be the wrong word here. The word that people want is content. When you sit here and daydream about having the bigger mansion, what you're actually doing is you are imagining yourself in the mansion being content with it. You imagine yourself sitting in that house and saying, I don't want anything more than this. The feeling that we are aspiring to is just being content. Happiness is always like a 30-second emotion. It's like laughter. Like if I tell you a funny joke, you'll laugh for 30 seconds and that's over. Like very few times in life are you happy for more than a couple minutes at a time. But what you want that is like a durable emotion is being content. Just saying like, I'm good with this. I don't want anything more. I
interviewed Dr. Anna Lemke, and she's like the scientist who's most renowned for talking about and writing about dopamine.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how much the molecule dopamine dovetails into this, because I think one of the things she said to me was that dopamine is the chemical for wanting.
Yeah.
And people have, I think, mistaken it for being the pleasure.
Happiness.
Yeah, happiness hormone.
It's more. It's like you want more.
And she told me this crazy study about this rat where they removed the dopamine receptor from its brain so it couldn't produce dopamine. And then they put food 2 inches from its mouth and the rat starved to death. Because and in that, so I've always thought about that. It's like, okay, so that's what dopamine is. It's the motivation to go get, to want, to pursue. What role is dopamine playing here?
It's huge. And that's actually a good realization to be like, a lot of this is not something that you can solve on a spreadsheet. It's not something you can solve with a formula. It's chemicals in your brain. And obviously some people are going to be more susceptible to that than others. I think my grandmother-in-law just had, for whatever it was wired differently than most people. Part of that was like she was a product of the Great Depression. She grew up during the Great Depression, which probably like lowered her expectations. She never had social media and whatnot. But of course, I think some people are wired differently than others for a level of contentment. But I think there's a big thing in psychiatry where diagnosing a mental illness is sometimes more important than the treatment. If you just get a diagnosis of like, oh, you're ADHD, whatever it is, just knowing, just like the fact that you can stop questioning why am I having these thoughts, you can understand why you have those thoughts is more important than the treatment sometimes. And I think that's true here. It's easier said than done to completely control your desires, but just knowing why you're doing it and realizing that it's probably not going to give you the happiness that you want, that it's just like any addiction, that the more you chase it, the further away it's going to get, can go a big ways. And so for me, myself, there's all the time, there are moments where I'm like, oh, I should get that car. Maybe we should get a bigger house. I have those feelings daily. So the feelings don't go away, but I think I'm better now than I've been in the past at reminding myself of like, it's not going to make you happier. You know that. You've tried this before. Yeah. You've tried it before and it didn't make you happy. What is going to make you happy is spending time with your kids, having a good relationship with your wife and your own physical health, and laughing with your friends and having good times with people who you enjoy. You know that's going to make you happy and you know that's not. And I have to remind myself because it's not intuitive. And I have dopamine that tells me you should want more. So you never get over it. But I think once you've diagnosed the problem, it becomes easier at just like spotting that emotion and realizing that it's telling you a story that's probably not true.
I wonder if I could trade the addiction, because you referred to it there as being an addiction. If it's for dopamine equation, could I not shift my addiction to something more productive? And would that mean that my spending would get better? So actually, when I think about me as 18 years old and having that horrific spending problem, maybe I just shifted the thing that gave me dopamine to like building businesses or to podcasting or to writing books or to being a great dad. I don't know. Do you know?
I think it's probably true that everybody, without exception, is addicted to something. And it's just harnessing that process for whatever it might be. So some people are addicted to, my wife's addicted to gardening, let's say. Yeah. She couldn't care less about investing or spending money on a nice, she could not care less about her car or my car or your car. But if you have a good gardener, if you have a pretty gardener, she's all over this. So everybody's got their thing. And it's just like, can you harness that for productivity? And I think a lot of like extremely successful people are people who took their natural addiction and harnessed it for productivity into their business. And that's why they're so successful. They just became obsessed with one thing. And it's a good question of whether we can actually guide that addiction or if it's just kind of pre-wired in itself. I think it's true for myself, someone who's written books about money for 20 years, thought about money for 20 years. My mom tells a story that when I was 3, I would sit there and count pennies. I don't want to count seashells. I don't want to count cards. I don't want to count rocks. I want to count money. And so I think I've always had this disposition towards being fascinated with money.
Why?
I don't know, because I did it when I was 3. I did it before I could even think through it. But I think everyone has their little thing. It's always been fascinating to me. I don't think I'm obsessed with money. I don't think it controls my life. But I've had to go out of my way to have a healthier relationship with it. But I think it's definitely been true that the reason that I've found myself in this career is that it's always been my thing. And I think everybody has that thing in their life.
People talk about addictive personalities, and I was reflecting on one of my best friends who was an alcoholic, had a problem with gambling, then had a problem with eating, then got obsessed with marathons. And he traded each one of those things for the next thing. So now he's like obsessed with health and fitness. And so when I was thinking about people that are struggling with money problems, and even my own historical struggle with money, I think I probably just traded it for something. And actually, I'm kind of happy about that, because I traded it for a better addiction, which is one that was productive.
Your career?
My career, and I guess doing this. I'm pretty addicted to doing this.
Right. But I think
it makes me happier than the plasma screen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think what's true about a money addiction is that it tends to be the classic addiction of, like, you tell yourself, if only I get one more hit, so to speak, then I'll be satiated. Then that'll be enough. And the answer is like, no, it absolutely will not. I'll tell you like a personal thing. I don't think this is true, but it made me laugh. My wife and I bought a new house about a year ago. It's an awesome house. We love it. It's great. And my brother-in-law came over the other day. And he goes, you're only going to live here for 2 years before you want to buy a bigger house. And I had to laugh because I'm like, God, like, I don't think that's true. I think we're going to live here for a while. But I know what you're saying is right. That's the natural guide towards it. That when we bought the house, it was like, oh, this is going to be so great. Can you imagine we're going to get to do this and get to do that? And we have these neighbors and whatnot. And you become accustomed to that very quickly. And then your gaze shifts a little bit higher. And you're like, yeah, but look at that house over there. That one's nicer, isn't it? That's always the natural thing. And that's dopamine at work. That is dopamine purely at work. Because the truth is, our previous house was great. And our previous house used to be our dream.
And dopamine exists when there's a gap between where you are and where you want to be with something. And when that gap closes, they often refer to that as the arrival fallacy.
Yeah, right.
Which is a really kind of what you're describing.
You tell yourself, once I get there, then I'll be good. Then that's enough. And it's a fallacy because you know that's not true. As soon as you get to that, whatever that mountaintop is, there's another mountain above it. It pushes you in a way that is not easy. Like, nobody should pretend that you can just go do this today. But it pushes you into appreciating what you have now and finding your joy, finding your happiness through other things that don't have the arrival fallacy. Never have, as a parent, have I said, oh, if only I had one more kid. Then that would be great. There's really no arrival fallacy for kids. You just kind of be like, I just appreciate being around you. I just appreciate all the, and if anything, it's the opposite. It's you look back and you're like, oh, I miss when you were younger. It was like, oh, it's sad how fast you're growing up. If anything, rather than like looking ahead and being like, oh, it's going to be better then, you're looking back and you're like, oh, I wish I had appreciated that phase a little bit more.
When you talked about, one of the ways to get to early retirement and to live a better life is to want what you have, and basically want less things. I go back and forward a lot with this idea because there's like the monks who say that like happiness is not wanting something. And then there's like the reality of life where striving for things seems to make me happy. And everybody describes the journey as being the most enjoyable part.
That's your purpose.
Yeah. So like how do I make sense of this? That like the monks are telling me that not to want anything because that's going to make me frustrated and unsatisfied. And then my lived experience is striving for things with a group of people seems to make me happy.
I think there's a difference. It's a subtle difference, but between pursuing something that you genuinely enjoy doing, which for you is this, and your business and whatnot, versus being addicted to something chasing something that you don't have yet. And so I imagine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine when you're doing this, you don't tell yourself, I need to work harder so that one day the podcast can be up here. I imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, but I imagine you come to work every day and you're like, I like doing this today. I like today. I liked yesterday. I'm going to like tomorrow. And so you're not chasing a false goal. You just actually enjoy doing it.
Do you know what? It's a weird thing because I'm going to be honest because it's the only useful position to take. It's a weird combination of both. So I say like, it's important for us to have some like goal, but also live in the total understanding that the goal doesn't actually matter.
Right.
And it's this weird dichotomy I live in was like, if we become the biggest podcast in the world, like set that as a goal because it gives us something to
chase. I get that.
KPI and then like put timeframes against and get excited by and focus on, but then also living in the total realization that it's not going to matter at all.
Right.
Nothing is going to change in my life. Zilch.
Right.
What am I going to get? A better black shirt? It's like, do you know, you know what I mean?
But here's the truth. The reason that we live in a world with a ton of technology and a ton of great businesses and great medicine and whatnot is because virtually everybody for all of human history has woken up every morning and said, it's not enough. I need more. That's the fuel of progress. And I don't want to live in a world where everyone wakes up and says, I have all I need. Because then progress would stop that day. We'd probably start declining that day. And so there is a paradox here of like, as a whole society, I'm grateful, and you should be grateful that people wake up unfulfilled.
Yeah.
Because we live in a way better world today than existed 100 or 200 years ago because of that. And the richest people in the world, who I think are by and large tortured psychologically, have created amazing technology that you and I benefit from. And the reason we're doing this podcast is because people before us who are way wealthier than you and I woke up in the morning and said, this is not enough. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, all those people, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, they woke up and said, I don't care if I have $100 billion. It's not enough. I need to create better technology. And that's great. We benefit from that. And so there is a paradox here that and that will never change. That will never change. So there's a paradox that like the better society becomes, I think. Like it's always going to be the case that as a whole society, we're going to have a level of angst and anxiety and not be satisfied and say it's not enough. At the individual level, though, I think you can recognize that game and contextualize it with your own life and say, like, look, I want more money. I want to sell more books and have a better career. I want to save more money. I also have to go so far out of my way to put it into context and say none of it's going to matter unless I have a higher purpose beyond that money. So I think you can aspire for more and still go out of your way to realize what the expectations game is, even if you can't perfectly control it. It's similar to like, I want to eat a good diet. Of course, I want to eat healthy food. I'm not going to pretend for a second that I don't want Oreos and ice cream because they're great and they're always going to taste great. And so I'm never going to get to a point where I say, I don't want a nicer house. I'm a human. And so are you, and so is everyone else. You're always going to have those feelings, but you can recognize the game. You can recognize the voice that's talking to you and realize when that voice lies to you and when it's telling you a story that is either false or just a little bit incomplete. I think if you had to like say, who is the happiest person in the world on average, not like naming a person, but if you had to describe the life of like, who's the happiest person out there, my guess is it's probably something close to a middle-class family that lives in a 3-bedroom house and has a 5-year-old car, but they have an amazing marriage, tons of friends, they're in good health, but they are by any other statistic ordinary. And at the end of their life, more than the people who are very, very successful, that ordinary family is going to look back when they're on their deathbed, when they're 95 years old and be like, that was good. That was a good time.
Do you think, this is a very strange question to ask, but do you think I could make myself like that?
No. Here's the truth. I think on the nature-nurture spectrum, most of what we believe and the feelings that we have is forged at conception. And we're just wired that way. And there's not much we can do about it. Some people have different aspirations. Elon Musk was born wired very differently than you and I. And there's nothing we can do about that. So we are who we are. But I think we can put those feelings into a better context. Even if we can't control having those feelings, we can tell ourselves a more complete story about why we're having those feelings and what those aspirations will actually do to our happiness.
So on this point of how to retire early, the first one was about managing what you want. Is there anything else there that if I'm trying to increase the probability that I get to retire early, I should know in terms of tactics and strategies?
Well, one of the things, this is a little bit different than the question that you asked, but one of the things that's important is that a lot of the people who do retire early, who they tell themselves, I'm going to save so much money, I'm going to retire when I'm 32, and then life's going to be great. What actually happens is they retire at 32, and 6 months later, they're bored out of their mind. And they realize that like what actually makes you happy is purpose. And for a lot of people, their purpose can be their career. Or they realize they had this idea that when they retired, it was just going to be a great life. But the truth is all of their friends are working and don't have time to go play golf with them on Tuesday afternoon. And so a lot of those people who retire early end up going back. They realize it was not what it was made out to be. Because they had, if the formula is independence plus purpose, they gained independence, but they kind of lost their purpose. And then and so it was incomplete. They didn't get what they wanted.
Well, what about passive income? People talk a lot about passive income. I had a friend DM me the other day and say, Steve, I've got some debts, etc. But if I could just figure out a way to create some passive income, then that should solve the problem. And this term passive income has become like...
completely overused.
Yeah.
Because, for example, a lot of people, when they talk about passive income, they're like, oh, I'm going to own real estate. I'm going to have some rentals, and that's passive income. If you think owning a rental property is passive income, you've never owned a rental property because there's nothing passive about it. It is a constant chain of broken toilets and leaky roofs and tenants who don't pay you on time. And there's nothing passive. That's a full-time job doing that. And so I heard someone say this recently, that there's two ways to get wealthier. You can sacrifice more or you can want less. And that's it. And gain passive income is not part of that equation. Because
what's the first one? Sacrifice more.
Sacrifice more.
What does that mean?
Work harder. Work in a job that has a lot of downsides, that might stress you out and requires you to wake up early and go to work and do some things that you don't want to do and spend time away from your kids in a way that you don't want to do. Sacrifice more or want less. Those are your two choices. And I think that's important in the passive income debate, because I don't think but there by and large is not a thing of passive income. Even if you're just like, you put your money in a savings account that pays 3% interest. Well, you had to sacrifice to earn that money and to save that money and to delay the gratification of that money. I really think it's an ironclad formula. Sacrifice more or want less. Those are your two options.
It's not nice.
But it's true.
People want, tell me which crypto to
right.
to invest in to get there.
Of course, everyone's always going to want the easy answer. Just like for health, the answer is eat a better diet and exercise. Nobody wants that. They just say, what's the secret potion? What's the secret formula? And maybe now we have Ozempic, so maybe now it's closer to a secret formula. But the truth is, what's the secret to better health? Sacrifice more, because working out and lifting weights and running is a sacrifice. It's not fun. It hurts. That's why it's good. Or want less. Be happier with your imperfect body. I mean, I think it's a great analogy between health and wealth.
Often the difference between a company succeeding or failing isn't down to its product or strategy. It's down to the people on the inside. After all, the definition of the word company is group of people. And some of the best companies in the world have been largely built by A players, because I'll let you in on a little secret. When you hire an A player, they go on to hire more A players, and it perpetuates. The challenge is finding those first few A players. I found the majority of mine on LinkedIn, who are a sponsor of this show. LinkedIn provides talent I could not find anywhere else. Talent with the necessary skills and culture fit that I'm looking for. Whenever I've paid to promote a role on LinkedIn, I've been able to hire faster and, of course, better. The data supports this too. You'll actually get 3 times more qualified applicants than if you posted the same role for free. So if you're trying to build something truly great, you can get started by posting a job for free by visiting linkedin.com/DOAC. That's linkedin.com/DOAC, and you can post your role for free there. Terms and conditions, of course, apply. How much do I need to understand what's going on in the wider world and the economy in order to understand my own spending behaviors, what I should spend on, how to get wealthy, how to save? Is it important to have any understanding around the macro? Because most people that listen to the show will probably hear these terms being spouted out by political commentators like the Federal Reserve interest rate, tariffs, etc. And should I understand any of this? Does any of it really impact me in a way that matters to me and my family?
I don't think it's necessary. And you could point to people I've written about in my books who had no financial education, no training, did not read the Wall Street Journal, could not tell you how the Federal Reserve works, but they had control of their psychology, control of their emotions. They worked hard, they saved their money, they invested it, and that's all you need. So the answer is you don't need to know how this works. Just in the same way that in order to be healthy, you don't need a PhD in biology. You don't need to understand how cell division works in order to be in good shape. And I think it's the same for the economy. And it can actually backfire for a lot of people that once they start reading the Wall Street Journal and learning a bit about finance, it increases their confidence more than their ability. So they're like, oh, I read the Wall Street Journal. I should go day trade crypto now because I read a thing that teaches me how the Federal Reserve works. So now it increases your confidence more than your skill.
That's so interesting.
And so I think it's important to be an informed citizen, and the Federal Reserve impacts your life and tariffs impact your life. So it's important to have some baseline understanding, but I think that's more about being an informed citizen and an informed voter than it is having financial skill.
Of all of my best friends, there's like 5 or 6 of them. The one that's most cash rich is the one that knows the least about, I think he's the most rich, period, to be honest. He's the one that knows the least about finance. And he knows the least about investing. He knows the least about crypto.
Well, what's the meme of like the tail spectrum of like the poor person drives a Toyota? The middle person has a Porsche, BMW, Mercedes, and the rich person goes back to Toyota. Of like, it's like whether you are very uneducated or extremely wise, you tend to end up.
Oh, this one,
that's it.
Okay.
And so I think it does tend to be the truth that the people who do the best financially either have like no financial education or extreme financial education. And it's a person in the middle that has their confidence is increased much faster than their ability. And they're like, oh, no, I read this thing on Reddit that taught me about day trading. So now I'm going to go bet my entire net worth on this company I've never heard of.
So funny. But so what is it that the person on the left and right side of the spectrum are both doing that is the same here? So for anyone that can't see, I'll put it up on the screen, but it just shows the bottom axis says net worth. And it basically says that people with low net worth buy a Toyota, people with like in the middle, that sort of middle percentage buy Lamborghinis and Porsches and Jaguars. And then people with extremely high net worths buy Toyotas. And obviously it's a metaphor.
It's not exactly perfectly true, but I think people, like a lot of comedy, you see it and like it's funny because people are like, yes, that's true. That's how it works. I think a lot of it is like, the richer you become, you realize that the big house and the fancy car didn't do anything for you. It didn't give you what you thought it was going to give you. And then so you're like, look, I'm just going to go back to utility. Like status didn't do it for me, so I'm going to go back to utility. It can also be the case that if you're successful and rich, you can gain your admiration and your attention through what the business that you built or the intelligence that you have or the friendship that you can offer others. And therefore your desire to be like, look at my car. Look how cool my car is, just goes down from there.
The way I also interpret it is that when you don't have much money or when you don't have a huge financial understanding like my friend, you end up playing the really boring money games.
Yeah.
And when you have a huge financial understanding, you probably also spend a lot of time playing the boring money games. And by boring money games, I mean index funds.
Yeah.
And the S&P 500 versus like crypto.
Yeah. I think you'll see that in investing, that like the absolute layperson will invest in index funds. And the extremely experienced Wall Street veteran will invest in index funds as well. And it's a person in the middle that just has like a little bit of intelligence, a little bit of experience, a little bit of information that is trying as hard as they can to outperform the market.
I kind of learned that from reading your book, The Psychology of Money, because I think, like many people, thought there was some trick or hack that this book was going to teach me to figure out how to trade coins at the right time or to like do Forex trading or whatever. But ultimately the book, if there was one overarching lesson it taught me, was that like patience and more boring investing is the way to build my wealth over the long term. And that like all other strategies have hidden trade-offs which lead you to being broke.
Yeah. I think there's a truth too that like there's an optimal level of intelligence that you want for investing, where you want to be smart enough to understand the basics, but not so smart that the basics bore you. And a lot of people get so smart that they're like, look, index funds, compound interest, it's too boring. Like I need something really complex to satisfy the intelligence that I have. And I there's a sweet spot where you're like, for me, I'm just like, oh, index funds and compound interest, like that's kind of as high as my intelligence goes here. Mm-hmm. But I think the truth is that is the best position to be in. Smart enough to understand the basics, but not so smart that they become boring to you. Because once they're boring to you, you're just like, sweep those away. Let's try to pull some more levers here.
What is going on in the world at the moment, Morgan? There's it feels like people are more divided than ever before. And I feel like a lot of these subjects we talk about are somewhat interconnected. It feels like there's a rise in inequality. You probably know the numbers better than I do. I mean, there's a graph in front of you there, which shows, I think is it wage growth?
Yes, monthly wage growth.
Monthly wage
for about 25 years.
And it appears to be going down.
Well, but this is growth. So in any given year, even if the growth is 2%, that's 2% higher than the previous year. So this is not wages over time. Now, it is true that if you look over a 25-year period and you took the average American family, not everybody, but the median, that their wages adjusted for inflation have gone up. not up as much as people would want over 25 years, but that they are better off than they were 25 years ago. What is also true is that the average median family would probably disagree with that statement, even if it is true statistically, for several reasons. One of which is their expectations have gone up over the last 25 years. The other is, even if you're looking at average wages, average, when we talk about these statistics, does not refer to any specific family. This is just a statistical number. Everyone spends their money differently. So if I told you, hey, average family, you're richer than you were in the year 2000. And they're like, yeah, but I'm trying to put my kids through college. And have you seen the price of college? And like, yeah, that might be true because the price of TVs has gone down. But have you seen the price of rent and housing? Like at the individual level, these statistics don't really mean that much and never have. I think a lot of economists get into a problem with that when they're like, well, statistically, X, Y, and Z has happened. But ignoring the psychology and the individuality of like what's happening actually on the ground in people's heads and how they spend their money, there's just endless amount of nuance in here. And so I think it's always been true that we live in a world where over long periods of time, there's good economic growth. We become wealthier. We have bigger, better things. We have more income. We have better medicine. It's equally true too that like there is always something legitimate to complain about. And it's legitimate to complain about. It's not just like, oh, you should be more grateful. It's a real thing. And so when I look at a graph like this, actually if I was thinking just like with my math head, I'd be like, oh, there's been quite a bit of growth over the last 25 years. Like the growth has been gone up and down, but it's growth. Never in this chart is growth below zero.
I guess the question there is, are rich people getting richer and are the poor getting poorer?
It depends. I mean, it's at the end of it. Are the rich getting richer? Yes. Are the poor getting poorer? Statistically, no.
Even adjusted for inflation?
I mean, it depends what period we're talking about here.
Yeah.
There was about a 20 or 30 year period where the answer was unequivocally yes. There was an interesting trend over the last 10 years where in percentage terms, the group of wage earners who had the highest percentage growth were actually the low wage. That was true for 2 or 3 years after COVID, where if you were a minimum wage worker, those were in percentage terms great years for you for getting wages. It's tapered off. So the answer to your question is the rich are getting richer. The poor, I think, are treading water by and large. There's always people who are doing differently than that. But when one group of society is getting richer, treading water feels like you're falling. And the specifics of how people spend their money. So even if on average, adjusted for inflation, their wages are flat, but if your rent skyrocketed, or you're trying to send your kids through college, or you have a long commute and you got to put gas in your tank, the individual level, things can feel very, very different from what the statistics show.
And what role do you think this sort of wealth inequality that is widening between the very, very top and everybody else is playing in everything that we're seeing play out at the moment? Because in the UK, it's almost like we're on like the verge of riots, it seems. And I think last month, there was millions of people in London protesting against immigrants coming over on boats and society becoming more multicultural. I'm so fascinated by this subject because, earlier on we said that unless you have immigration in the Western world, you have population decline. And
but population decline sucks.
Because you have a hit on GDP.
The biggest problem right now throughout a lot of the world, at least one of the biggest perceived problems is immigration.
And the same's playing out in the United States. If I go on X, although I know what X is, it's people, maybe it's just my algorithm, but it's people attacking immigrants and immigration and people that are brown and black and whatever else it might be. I'm wondering how all of this is intertwined and if it is connected at all, in your view.
I think as an amateur student of history, across cultures, all over the place, all through history, what you want to avoid more than anything in society is when probably a third of the population wakes up every morning and says, this isn't working. That's the point at which it's going to collapse from there, is when enough people wake up in the morning and just have this feeling of like, whatever this is, it's not working out for me. You want to avoid that part. And so like, look, I tend to be a free markets guy. I'm a capitalist. I think people should be able to become very wealthy, et cetera, et cetera. You also don't want to get to a point where people become so wealthy that a big chunk of society just wakes up every morning and says, fuck this. This is not going to work out for me. And I think we're either there or precariously close to there. in a lot of areas in the world. Social media, that's always been the case, and social media makes it 100 times worse than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. For example, you and I are recording this a day after Charlie Kirk was assassinated yesterday. And there were, who knows what percentage it was, but I think it was not hard on social media to find people who were celebrating it yesterday. Now, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, did those people exist too who celebrated assassination? Of course. But because of social media, by and large, you did not hear from them unless you were part of that group. Whereas today, virtually everybody yesterday saw people celebrating Charlie Kirk's assassination. And so even if those feelings existed in the past, they're much more apparent today. You see them today in a way that you did not before. So because of that, it's easy to say we're more divided today, we're more extreme today, we're more pessimistic than they are today. I think the nuance is that's not actually true. You're just more aware of it. That those feelings always existed. They existed in the 1990s, they existed in the 1950s. It was just much easier to contain those. And for the average citizen who got their information from one newspaper, one evening news program, to feel like things were much more stable and in control, and that people were much more uniform in their opinions than they actually were.
Before we start recording, we were talking about the Charlie Kirk shooting and how social media's ability to dehumanize other people at probably a faster rate than history would have done it is pretty remarkable. And you see a lot of that. You see a lot of it taking place on both sides. I think both sides describe each other as being like animals and inhumane. And one side's calling the other side Nazis. And then the other side is calling the other side, referring to them in animal terms because of maybe the color of their skin or their behavior. We saw a lot of that when that heinous individual killed the young lady on the train in America. And the way, look, this person is this worst thing on planet Earth. But the language was it was putting that person in a group of other people.
Yes.
And then making the whole group a pack of animals.
Right. Because in that situation too, we talked about this earlier. I don't know that individual's name, doesn't matter, but no one refers to him by his name. It's them. It's they. And that once you dehumanize any group of people like that, and this has been the case for all of human history, that 99.9% of people cannot kill another human, but they're perfectly fine killing them, that group. Once you dehumanize, you can do anything. And at a much lower level, everyone realizes this with road rage. I've had road rage. The person cut me off. That son of a bitch, honk my horn, flip. I don't get too extreme with it. But in things I would never do eye to eye. But once I'm looking at a car